All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to speak fast because I have a lot of things to say. Basically, if you take a look here, this is kind of my gameography. This is all the things that I have done over the course of my career. I'm an independent developer. Basically, the theme of this talk is talking a lot about kind of the indie things that I've done, the lessons that I've learned the hard way. I have a lot of unconventional advice, as you'll see. But as you can also see from this slide, I've been doing indie for a long time. The takeaways here is basically all the blue stuff is kind of like traditional kind of stuff I've been doing through like traditional industry or contract work or what have you. And then the green stuff is more kind of indie stuff. So that's my own projects, basically at my own studio, sometimes working with other folks, sometimes not, sometimes working solo. If you check this this history, you can see I've done both kind of the production track, so being a producer at Microsoft and previously working through the production track at Capcom and Midway as well as doing a lot of engineer stuff and working as a senior engineer. And so I kind of have unusual experience in the sense that I've worked on both of those fields, which is very handy on the indie side of things, because when you're in indie, you really have to think about both business and engineering, as well as all the creative side as well. So other key points in here is basically I've done both the development, especially on the indie side, but I've also done the publishing side. So I've been at publishing studios, and so I've seen kind of both sides of that dynamic. I was doing the math the other day, and I realized I've been in the industry 16 years. I did not realize I was in the industry for 16 years until yesterday. That was kind of an oof moment of like, wow, okay, this has been going fast. Of that time, I've been indie full-time for 10 years. That's not contiguous. And so you'll see in my work history, this is very common with indies, where like the first time I went indie, I only did that for about a year. And then I did some contract work. And then the next time was 3.5 years. And then the next time was basically 5.5 years up through today. And that process is basically me getting better at indie and being able to make my funds work longer. Basically being able to get a little bit more revenue and keep myself in business. Because basically each time that I went back to contract work, I had actually like completely depleted my savings more or less. And that is very common for indies. You kind of do this back and forth of like, okay, I work for traditional industry, stock up some money, then I go off and do my own thing for, a year or what have you, or 5.5 years at this point. And if you're really lucky, really lucky, eventually you get to a point where you're actually able to be self-sustaining. And that is fortunately where I am right now, which is extremely exciting. It's not anything that like most people would find exciting if I was like, oh yeah, I'm renting a place in the middle, way out. Most people would be like, well, that's not that exciting. But when you realize it's indie and it's doing the thing that I want to do, then it becomes a lot more interesting. Mostly this is also small teams. Often my projects have been completely solo, but I've been very fortunate to get to work with some amazing people over the years on kind of my own projects, which is very exciting to be able to have my own vision and deliver my own vision. And I'm very grateful for all the people that have helped me along the way. I have a couple caveats before I get into the meat of this talk. First off, this is very unconventional advice. I definitely recommend that you look at other indies to see what their recommendations are. They're going to tell you a lot of more traditional things. This is my unconventional advice based on all of my career. A lot of the things that people recommend just have not worked for me, and I honestly don't see them working for most people, and yet people continue to recommend these strategies. And so I'm here to be kind of brutally honest about indie and brutally honest about what works and what doesn't work. That being said, take this with not just a grain of salt, take it with an entire container of salt, because this is very unconventional advice, and don't let, one random speaker, completely change how you approach, starting your indie studio. Second warning is this is a very business focused talk. That doesn't mean that indie is only about business or that I only care about business. However, making money is very useful for being able to continue doing indie. And if you want to just have a little side project that you do for 6 months or something that you do at home, that's all valid. You don't necessarily have to be doing indie for money. And I certainly don't do indie only for money. I could make a lot more money working for AAA or working for, people making shopping carts or whatever. Definitely indie is it's a starving artist kind of lifestyle. I think it's worth it. It's not for everyone. And I think it's also worth, in order to continue being indie, spending a little bit of time on the business side of things. I've left you in suspense because I'm about to reveal the secret formula for indie success. It all comes down to this one formula. That's my talk. All right. No, I'm going to spend the rest of this presentation basically breaking down this formula because I really do think that everything in indie comes down to this one formula in terms of like being able to having a sustainable business. And that is your cost to acquire a customer less than your average revenue per paying user? These two numbers will rule everything in your life. This is the thing that if you want to have a sustainable business, you have to like keep an eye on these two metrics. And so let's define how you actually figure these out for your product. First, the cost of acquiring a customer. Basically, you take the amount of cost that you spend specifically on advertising, and you divide it across how many paying users you get out of that. So, for instance, if we hire Hatsune Miku to go grab her megaphone and stand and yell about our game for an hour, and we're like, okay, here you go, Miku, here's $10. And then 5 people are like, hey, that sounds pretty interesting. I'm going to go, buy this game. So we now have $10 divided by 5 paying people. Our cost of acquiring a customer in this example is $2. Okay, so that sounds pretty fair, but now we have to look at the other side of the formula. What's our average revenue per paying user? Well, that's the amount of revenue divided by the number of paying users. So we might have users who are at different dollar values. Maybe we've got a game that's got DLC. Maybe we're doing microtransactions. We've got different opportunities here. So one user is not always paying the same amount, but you kind of average it together, and we can see across all 5 of these people, it averages out to about $8. And so if we do the math, we can see, okay, so our cost to acquire a user is $2, ARPU, and that is actually how people pronounce it, is $8, and which means we have a profit of $6 per user. That's a business. This is really exciting because this means that you can go hire Miku again, and you can be like, hey, Miku, bring more people. And then you can keep doing that, and you can keep making games, and it's great. You can even scale up your marketing, so you can try different marketing messages. You can have different influencers. You can try like advertising on the web. You can try different strategies, and like different strategies might have different ratios here. Maybe some of them don't work. Maybe some of them do work, but you can kind of reinvest in the ones that work, and you can kind of scale up that way. So all of this sounds great and hopefully really simple. But why do so many indie games fail? Because I think it's not really a secret that the vast majority of games fail, and even more so, indie games are failing all the time, speaking financially. And that's kind of unfortunate because if your game fails financially, how are you going to make another game? We work in kind of a capitalist environment, so you kind of have to be like, how am I going to continue paying the bills? Well, let's look at the numbers to see why this is happening. So I see extremely commonly indie games will price at a list price of $10. Put it up on Steam or whatever. They immediately take a gross 30% fee, and then sometimes even more than that, and you're left with $7 ARPU, not even including income tax or all the other stuff. But at best case, like you're getting $7 out of that. Well, maybe that can still work, but like, what is actually the cost to acquire a customer? Well, I've got really bad news because people have studied this, and the most recent instance I could find was from mobile games. And so on mobile games, this is a report from 2020. I don't think it's significantly different for other platforms or what have you, but they found that the cost to acquire a paying user was $43.88, and that is per every single user. So this formula does not work so well because you're paying $43 to get a user, and then you get $7 in return, which means that for every user you're losing $36. That's not great business. You can't continue making games this way. And this is the formula. This is why so many indie games fail, is because this formula is unbalanced. And so how do we fix this? Well, we can try to balance this formula. And that's what this talk is about, is basically different strategies I've found to lower the cost of acquiring a customer on the left, and also on the right to increase the ARPU, how much people are paying. And if you can get this formula to balance, you have an indie lifestyle. Like, this isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm gonna, buy a boat or anything like that, or, even a house, right? But like, this is just basically surviving every month to make rent. This is like how you can survive as an indie on a like very low kind of indie salary. So first, let's take a look at the left side of this formula. I'm going to run through a bunch of different strategies that people tend to try a lot, and give you my hot takes on whether or not they work. First off, conventions. Do they work? Well, I think they're great for feedback. You can have people come through, play your game. You get some really honest answers from people. You also get to see how they're playing. So I think conventions are really great for feedback. Sometimes they're great for networking, like you can meet folks, people that you can work with on a particular project. Different, not usually publishers. I mean, people like to say, oh, a publisher's going to come by or an influencer's going to come by. I don't necessarily know about that. But definitely, like, I've met some people to work with here and there on conventions, and that's worked really well. Does it work for marketing? No. I can say categorically, in 10 years of trying this, and even doing it in AAA, I've just never seen the marketing return, personally, just in terms of a sheer ROI, return on investment. I have a story to go with this. A couple years ago, and by a couple I mean like 6 years ago, I was demoing at PAX Prime, up in the convention center. And we had a booth on the 6th floor. We had people come by. I handed out 6,000 printed cards, full color, had all the information about the game, had a game code on the back. Basically, seeing how many people converted. So I managed to give out 6,000 of these over the course of a weekend. So I was busy. I was hitting the pavement and making the sales pitch. And 6,000 I gave out. How many people actually redeemed those tokens? 6. So 6 out of 6,000. Did I get a return on investment? No. And every convention I've ever done has been very similar to that. Like, conventions are not great for marketing. It's great for these other things. It's not great for marketing. I still think you should do conventions. I think that it's part of the indie experience. I think it's a very useful thing to do, but just not from a marketing perspective. And you should go in expecting that and also adjusting your pricing. So maybe you shouldn't spend thousands of dollars on a booth because you're not going to get that. Maybe you should look at lower cost opportunities. On that note, I have very strong feelings about festivals. You're going to see a running theme in this presentation, which is basically people taking advantage of indies. There's a lot of organizations that will take kind of naive indies who have not really done indie for a long time, and they kind of take advantage of them and get some money out of them, and then those indies leave and do other stuff, and new indies come in, and those new indies get taken advantage of, and it's this terrible cycle. And I think that some festivals do this. So there are some legitimate festivals, on the other hand. Free festivals, I think, are great. Festivals where you pay for space, I think, are great. So, like, for instance, if you go to iFest and you pay $30, that's extremely fair. And I think that that's totally valid, and I think that's a great deal. However, there are other festivals. I want to call out specifically IGF, Indie Mega Booth, PAX 10, and those festivals suck. Basically, the way that they do it is they kind of prey on naive indies, and they say, hey, pay us $80, $100, $200, whatever it's up to these days. Pay us this money, and maybe we'll look at your game. Maybe we'll put it in the festival, but you're out the money either way. And I can tell you, of one of these three that I have on this slide, I'm not going to say which one, but one of these very respected festivals did not even redeem any tokens for my game, despite me paying, whatever, $100 or whatever it was. Like, these festivals, I would go to so far as to say are scams, and you should absolutely avoid them. Because do you really think, like, there's 600 people who apply to these every year, and a lot of it is based on who you know. They don't want to say that, but that's, having seen this for 10 years and having seen what happens, I really think it's, it's not just like, oh, you put your thing in, and, it's, at best, they're looking at trailers and probably not even that. You can go to free festivals, or you can go to pay for space festivals. If you know you're gonna have to pay $30 or $100 or whatever, but you're definitely getting space, that's a fair deal. Otherwise, you're buying a lottery ticket. If it's like pay $100 and maybe you'll come in, maybe you won't. That's a lottery ticket, and it's not even a good lottery because, like, if you look at the previous slide, it does. You're not gonna. Convention is not gonna break out. You're not gonna get breakout success at a convention. You're just gonna get feedback. So this is a terrible deal. Avoid IGF. Avoid IMB. Avoid PAX 10. Like absolute scams. Strong take, but like I've seen this over many years, and it's always panned out the same way for me. All right. Lighter notes. Press. Press is something that has historically been, people in the indie space will always say, oh, do press release, etc. Does press work? Well, I don't know if it necessarily works as much these days. Back in the day, you could get a little bit of a bump, especially like some sites. I remember Rock, Paper, Shotgun when I got an article on there back in the day. Like that was a big bump. Other sites, I've been on, Joystick I got a little bit of a bump on. I was on, like, the front of Game Informer's website once, and it, like, didn't even notice it, which is, I don't know if people just don't, like, read anymore. Maybe they're all on YouTube. That's probably a big part of it. But press is one of those things that you can spend an hour, write a press release, see if it works. Don't expect a whole lot. Certainly, I'm really... very grateful for kind of all my coworkers in the press industry, and like there's some very talented people out there. But is this necessarily going to get you a lot of sales? I don't think so. I think press usually follows trends as opposed to starting trends. And so I don't know how much effort that you should really put into, on the press side of things. Definitely make yourself available for, press that want to talk to you. They're really nice people generally. The ones that I've met, it's worth cultivating those connections, but also don't maybe, make that a main focus or put too much, mind share into it. Platforms. Are platforms worth it? Basically, your Steam, your PlayStation, your Xbox, etc. Like basically the usual the pitch for this is pay us 30%. On like iPhone or Android, pay us 30% and we'll give you some traffic, maybe. Well, I don't think that usually works out. Most of the times you get these store entries and it's kind of like a tree falling in the woods and nobody hears it. There's a million trees, there's a million different games in these libraries, and just having a page on a website is not really going to drive you traffic. Steam is a little bit better at it than most, but even still, is it worth 30%? I don't know. Every year I sour a little bit more on platforms. That being said, there's one very important caveat when it comes to platforms, and that is featuring. Featuring, if you can basically get on the front page of Steam, which these days is algorithmic, but also there's other platforms that are still manually curated, like PlayStation or Xbox or like most other platforms, mobile, for instance. These are very hard to get. You can get them sometimes, and if you can get them, they are life-changing. This is the amount of traffic that, if you ever get exposed to this amount of traffic, it is insane. This is truly life-changing. This is get recognized at the supermarket, like for real, kind of exposure that really puts you into the major leagues and can really change everything. So if you can get featured, yeah, it probably is worth 30%. But these days, what most platforms do is they say, hey, get on our platform, and yeah, maybe you can get featured, and then you don't. And so what I recommend is, it doesn't necessarily work for Steam, but for the consoles, you can go to the consoles and you can be like, hey, I'm interested in putting my game on your platform, and they'll say, sure. And then you can say, will you feature me? And they'll say, probably nothing. Or maybe you badger them for a bit and then they come back to you and they're like, no, we're not going to feature you. But you just saved yourself months supporting time, because just having an entry on a console platform does nothing. You're just going to spend a lot of money wasting your time and having an entry in a store page, and you don't get any traffic from that. And so like, you should carefully consider platforms, and whether you want to go direct to consumer sales or whether you want to go through platform, because once you're on a platform, they have the powerful SEO. So anyone searching for your game is immediately Steam is gonna pop up in the first ranks, and then your official website's gonna be like down at the bottom of the search engine rankings. So just having an entry on the store page means that the people who are already interested in your game are going to go to the platform instead of going to your website, so you're going to be paying that 30% whether you want to or not. There's also all sorts of other things about most favored nation clauses and anti-competitive stuff. I could do a whole talk about that. I'm not going to, but basically consider whether platforms are worth it or not, because in some ways, if you can get featured, they are. If you can't get featured, I mean, you're paying a lot of money. Publishers. So at this point, you're probably maybe being a little depressed, and you're like, well, okay, I'll just go to a publisher and they'll figure it out. No, Publishers are not magic. I used to be a publishing side producer. I can tell you, a good publishing side producer will be able to boost your your sales and pay for themselves, yes, but they're not going to like magically get like a tenfold improvement or anything like that. If you can't get your formula to already balance without the publisher's help, the publisher's not going to come in and wave a wand and make it like magically better. And there's a lot of bad publishers out there. I've been fortunate to work for some good publishers, but there are some bad ones out there that prey on naive indies. I see this all the time. I've had some of them have approached me. It's usually they come by and they're like, hey, we're gonna market your game for you. And then if you dig into it, you find out market your game is basically, we're gonna put a thing on Twitter, on our Twitter feed that's got a couple hundred people or whatever. It doesn't, like, you gotta watch out, basically. So a good publisher, if they're a good publisher, they're going to give you guaranteed funding for your game, which can be very, very useful for actually financing the development of the game, or they're going to give you guaranteed hard marketing dollars spend that they're going to spend on the game. So basically, if a publisher approaches you or you approach a publisher, make sure they have skin in the game, because otherwise you're going to give them a huge revenue cut, and they're not going to earn it. So a good publisher will do these things, a bad publisher will not.
Can I ask a quick question? Peter has a question that's relating to that last slide.
Yes.
Is guaranteed minimum payment per copy sold?
Well, so usually what they'll do is they'll say, you'll say, okay, I want to, you could say like yes and no. So it's, it's usually capped. So basically, you would say like, I want guaranteed minimum payment of, $10,000 or whatever it is, right? So it's usually a fixed number of copies. So guaranteeing 100 copies or 1,000 copies, whatever that variable is. And then there'll be opportunity to go higher than that, of course, but basically putting a floor in there. And the reason to insist on a floor is because there are a lot of platforms out there, and especially like most recently, it's the crypto platforms that are coming after me. But it's always been one thing or another, every trend, right? And they're all like, we got a new platform, and I fell for that like a couple times, and then now I say, hey, okay, that's great. I want you to guarantee at least X dollars sold. And usually that they go away. They go away very quickly because like they're just trying to get a bunch of people in their store, and then you don't make any money. So
great. That answers his question. Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Absolutely. All right. All right. So now you're like these other methods don't work. How about virality? How about social media? Does that work? No. Like you can go to people who are already like prolific on these platforms, and that does work. Like talking to an influencer. Trying to do it yourself is extremely hard. There are plenty of indie survivor bias stories about, oh, I went on TikTok and TikTok changed my life, like that kind of thing. Maybe you can try it. I've been doing it for 10 years. It's never really worked out for me. I've had a couple posts that go viral, but for the most part, it's a lot of swinging and a lot of not hitting. I will say there are two things that you should look at here. First is index sites. I absolutely recommend you get on index sites. These are basically like indices of different games, like MMORPG used to have a list of all the MMOs, and getting on that list, it's not life-changing numbers. It's not like being featured. However, it's continuous traffic. It's the gift that keeps on giving, because you continually get like a small trickle of traffic, and that boosts your SEO. So your search engine rankings go increased. And it also doesn't cost much. It costs like, 20 minutes of filling out a form, and you multiply that by a bunch of these index sites. And I think index sites are worthwhile. I also recommend being part of relevant forums and communities. So there's probably a community out there that's relevant to your game. And you're probably already in it if you're, making a game based on something, which is going to be my next slide. But basically, if you're already in a community, like, sharing, not in a spamful way, but in a way that is like, this is something that matches your interests, being part of that is, I think, very symbiotic. And that leads into my next slide is product market fit. Basically, are you making something that people want to buy? And you should really look at like supply and demand, for instance, on Steam. Like I see constantly bullet hell games coming out. There's like a lot of these every day, and they always have like 1 review or 0 reviews. And they might be great games, but there's just too much competition. Like there's way too many people making games in those fields for the amount of demand that there is. And so this is the classic blue ocean versus red ocean. If you've ever heard that term, basically you want to be the fisherman that's in the blue ocean where not a lot of other people are fishing and there's some fish there. You don't want to go to the red ocean where it's just full of blood because everyone's, fishing and, you can't get any, there's no fish there, right? And so you should carefully consider product market fit. And I think that like my secret indie strategy for this, is basically look for communities that you're already in. So you're probably, you're probably already in a community that is for an interest group or an activity or something like that. And you can make games for those interest groups. And especially if they don't already have a game yet, like there's going to be way more interest in that because you basically already got a community that's interested in it. So for example, if you rewind many, many years ago, there weren't really a whole lot of like cooking games or farming games or what have you. And then obviously now there's tons of them, but back in the day there wasn't necessarily, and there are communities for that. There's interests for that. And it appeals to people because, if you want to have this experience in a game, there's one game and you're making it. Like that is amazing if you can ever find a unique niche and basically go to that area and fish in there. And so this slide is saying kind of find the thing that you care about and find something that someone's not already making and then combine those two, and that's the game that you should make. And this kind of gets into like the concept of ikigai, which is this Japanese thing that says the meaning of life is basically what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at. And the intersection of all of those is ikigai. And so my recommendation is find your ikigai, find the game that is both something that really appeals to you and also you can get paid for because there's not a lot of competition. And like I know it's probably strange to hear an indie talk about competition because the overarching thing that you're going to hear from like most indies is like, oh, it's this warm and fuzzy community, and it is. But make no mistake, like competition is real. And if you have like at the end of the day, we're making products, and if you've got 100 products doing the exact same thing, you're in a saturated market, and it's very hard to survive in a capitalist environment that way. I know this is probably like really not feeling very good to some folks who want to kind of believe in the purism of indie. But I'm here to tell you that like if you want to survive as an indie, you got to think about these things because this is how you keep in business. Speaking of which, more business stuff, funnels. So funnel is basically all the steps that you go through when you're going from a person hearing about your game to they look at your product page to they download the demo to they finally buy the game and maybe they buy DLC, etc. And basically at each step of that funnel, you're losing people. And so you want to make the funnel as wide as possible, as smooth as possible. So basically not losing people at every step. My secret indie survival tip here, my best strategy is have a web version of your game. Because you see a lot of people drop out from the step of like, I hear about this game to, I've got to download something from like this random executable from this rando indie I've never heard of before. Like, I don't know if I really trust this person. And you build that trust by having a web version of the game so that people can see, oh, this is a legit game. I actually really care about this. And somewhat ironically, even if you have a web version of the game, people immediately ask for a download version of the game. I've seen that on multiple projects and multiple communities. Like people really like the download version after they're in the community, but when they're just hearing about the game, when they're clicking through and browsing on the web, having a web version is extremely powerful. So I definitely recommend that. Okay, so at this point, you've probably tried a bunch of these free mechanisms that we've kind of gone through before, and you've probably realized, oh, these aren't really working that well. They're doing a little bit, but you kind of get what you pay for. And since most of those strategies are free, you're not really getting a whole lot. So you're back here at paid user acquisition. The problem with paid user acquisition is you're competing against like companies that sell cars for ad space. And so like you want the same ad space, but then Ford is coming in and Ford is saying, well, we don't mind having a cost of customer acquisition that's in the thousands of dollars because we have like $10,000 margin on each of these products because new cars are insanely expensive and it's like a very high margin business. And that's true in many industries like soda, for instance. It's flavored water. They have a huge margin. And you're competing against these companies for ad space and they can pay a lot of money. And so what's the strategy for this? Well, if you go to Google, you go to Facebook, you try and buy ads, I've never had that work. I've never had the formula balance out with any of these mainstream purchase options. What I have had work that people don't really talk about is you can go and you can work with sites directly. You can go to the people running the forum for the community and say that you want to buy a banner ad, right? Go to a streamer in this community and be like, hey, I'd love for you to, feature this, and we can work out a deal where you get for every click through, you get a sale or something like that. Or just pay out directly, however you want to work that. Basically, if you work with like the communities, they're going to be really excited because they have content that appeals to their audience and it's relevant to their audience, and it just doesn't feel like some rando car ad that nobody cares about. Here's a product people actually do care about in the community. And so they're usually willing to give you a fair deal, and it's a deal that's mutually beneficial because they're going to get more revenue than they would if they were working through one of these, CPM firms like Google or whatever that, take a huge chunk of the revenue. Now, you still want to check analytics. You still want to look at, if you want to use Google Analytics or some other product like that, you can see how much is your cost of user acquisition, how much, you can plug in the thing to see how much people are paying, etc. And you can see, is your formula working? And then on those venues that it is working, you can, scale that up. And the venues it's not working, you can scale that down. All right, so I've spent a lot of time talking about how to optimize the left side of this formula. Let's talk about the right side of this formula. So the business model, I think, is probably like the most central to the right side of this formula. And basically, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. You can do a one-time purchase, which is what most indies do. And not surprising, it doesn't necessarily work out for most indies because $10, I mean, you can get that formula to be lower. Are you going to get it down to less than, $7 or $10 or whatever? Like, yeah, probably not. And that's why you see most AAA games do things like season passes and stuff, is because the cost to develop a game and market it, like, you kind of have to be in that territory to survive. There's also microtransactions. I've done a couple of microtransaction games. Microtransaction is really hard. There's a lot of downsides. Microtransactions is one of those that you have to really design the game around microtransactions, and you end up spending a lot of time making a game that is good in microtransaction. I will say, because I know that there's a lot of hate for microtransaction, and in fact, I don't even really like microtransaction myself. I don't really do microtransaction games anymore, either as a player or as a developer, because it really kind of, you have to bias your game towards the people at the top end of the scale that are paying the most amount of money. And I mean, I've been very fortunate to have some amazing customers that have really supported development by being on that end of the scale. People have spent, 4 figures. One person even spent 5 figures on a game. That's absolutely amazing in terms of supporting you. And I mean, these people are very savvy customers too. So like they're people who are really engaged. They care about the game. They want it to succeed. Half of it is they're buying it to help support the game, but the other half is that they're also very savvy customers, and like they've got spreadsheets of their own. They make their own spreadsheets to see what's the best deal and kind of min-maxing things. So they're very intelligent, and they're also very caring customers. However, just implicitly, you're going to have, in order to do microtransactions, you have to give people something of value to make it worthwhile, as well you should. Because you have to give them something for that amount of money that they're spending. That means that like everyone on the other side of the spectrum, like the vast majority, hundreds of thousands of people aren't getting access to that content. And as a developer, that's kind of painful because I really want all people to be able to access and play my games. And I also don't really like how it kind of brings the wealth inequality of the real world into the virtual world. I think that's kind of unfortunate. So while I am very grateful for the people who have supported me on microtransactions, extremely grateful, I do want to in future, and currently, I'm moving to more equitable solutions like subscription. In fact, subscription is now my favorite thing. This is basically now going to become a pitch for subscriptions, because subscription is great because basically it's much more accessible. So like most people can afford $5 a month for something they really care. Most people in the U.S. Are going to be able to afford that, and that means that like as a developer, you get continuous revenue, and you get it from a larger percentage of people, and it's much more approachable than having to pay thousands of dollars. You just pay $5. And I think it's good for a consumer too, because you see a lot of early access titles, and they do like early access $20, and then those developers go off and disappear. And with subscription, you don't get that. Like if a developer disappears, the subscription goes away, right? Like no one will buy the subscription if they're not getting new content drops. And I think that that's really the great thing about subscription is it incentivizes you to continue working on your game and continue finishing your game, and then building ongoing live content for your game. And so when someone cares about a game that they're willing to pay a subscription for, like, that's really good. I think that's good on the player side, because you can't just, like, one-time purchase if you have like a $60 game or something and then people buy it and then it sucks. Well, they've lost $60. Maybe they can get a Steam refund. Maybe they can't. But they're out their money. Whereas subscription, they just hit, one button, subscription stopped. And so if your game sucks, you can't bait and switch on subscription, which I think is great. I think like subscription encourages good business practices, encourages good games. I want to differentiate between developer subscription and platform subscription. Basically, developer subscription is a customer buys a subscription from you or through a platform, whatever. But platform subscription is where something like Game Pass, where you pay, Microsoft or whoever, $20 a month and you get a catalog. Well, developers aren't really getting ongoing revenue from that. Maybe they get it for that current month or whatever. But the great thing about developer subscription is it kind of ties together with I want to support this game, and so I'm buying a subscription to this game so I can see it developed further and further. And a lot of people in developer subscription, they'll just kind of leave it rolling. Even if they're not playing the game, they'll leave it rolling for 6 months. And the reason they do that is because they want to continue supporting development. With the platform subscription, you don't get that. If they don't play the game every month, it's going to go to the platform, or maybe you don't even get a cut of that. So I think developer subscription is really the way to go. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides, because there are kind of two different methods of building a pricing model for your game. I'm going to posit this as a question. So, is it easier to put your game up for $5 and get 10,000 people to buy that? Your goal is, I want to get 50 grand for the year, have enough to pay rent, etc. Just support a living. Let's say that goal is 50K. It's going to obviously be different depending on where you live. But let's say that's your goal. You want to put your game up for $5, charge 10,000 people? Or is it going to be easier and more viable to get 500 people to pay $100? Which is easier? I'll let you think about that while I get some water. I'm going to argue that it's easier to do the second, which probably sounds crazy, because who would spend $100 on a game? Well, in subscription, that's very easy, because if you have people that pay $10 a month, you're already at $120 over the year. And so it's a much lower barrier to entry. Whereas with $5, it's, you pay $5 once and then, it's over. And so I think with the second example, it's a lot easier. And it kind of depends on whether you're making a game that appeals to a lot of people very narrowly, like they only want to play it for 5 minutes, or if you're making a game that's like appeals to a very small set of people, but very deeply. I have a brief story about this. Basically, when I was at Emerald City Comic Con, one of my friends came up and they said, "You're kind of a cult developer." And I was like almost offended, but she explained what she meant. And I was like, "Oh yeah, no, you're right. I'm totally a cult developer." But basically people would come by, play my game. Most of them would, sit down, play, leave, be there for a minute, decide it's not for them. Nope, move on. Every once in a while, someone would sit down and they would play it for like 4 hours. They would just use convention time is very valuable. Like there's a lot of things you want to see, but people will come by and they get really invested in these games. And so, I have games that people have played for, thousands of hours. I am definitely kind of a cult developer in the sense that like my games don't appeal to many people, but the people they do appeal to, they appeal to deeply, and they really care deeply about it. And so when I'm looking at how to price my games, that kind of informs that maybe I should look at, this second option, because it does appeal to a smaller number of people more deeply. Basically, you got to look at, if you've ever seen this curve before, it's basically, you see this a lot in economics. It's the price sensitivity curve. Basically, how much does this game cost versus how many people are willing to pay that. Obviously, this curve is going to be very, very variable. It's going to depend on what kind of game you have, the audience, how badly you draw it in Krita. Don't worry too much about the form of this. Just the general idea is you have, subscription. If you set a $100 price point, then you're going to get a certain number of people, and the people on the kind of the right side of this will like really complain loudly. Whereas like in like way over here, far on the far end, you're going to have at the free point, you're going to have people who are complaining who don't want to ever pay for a game. But I don't know if necessarily those people are the audience that you should go after if they're not willing or able to pay for a game, because like at the end of the day, you have to make a business, you have to make a living on games. And so if you compare that, this area under the curve is basically how much money you would be earning. Versus if you compare it to a one-time purchase game, you have, $5 right here. And you can see that the area of the graph on the right is way smaller than the area of the graph on the left. And that's my expression when I see this is people price their games for $5 or whatever. And I'm just like, how do you make this a business? How do you survive on this? And this isn't like, I'm not coming from a perspective of like, oh, I got to do the left so I can buy a yacht or something ridiculous like that. No, I'm on the left so I can buy crazy things like health insurance and just survive and make rent payments every month. The left allows you to eke out a living while the right is not sustainable, in my opinion.
So basically, we have a quick question.
Sure.
Another question from Peter about your opinion usage of ad space in revenue.
Yes. Let me loop back to ad space at the end. In fact, I will take a little note about that because I think that is a great topic.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So I want to talk a little bit, I want to just basically finish this point about hits-driven versus cult-driven. And so you can do either of these strategies. Both are very viable. I think the hits-driven business is basically hoping that your game is going to break out because a lot more people are going to be willing to pay, $5. It's kind of that like discount at 90% on Steam strategy, which a bunch of people try and it almost never works. But it is something that you can try. It is, in my opinion, very hard, very expensive to acquire a user. You see that with the $44 cost of user acquisition on mobile games. Given how hard it is to acquire a user, if you can keep a user around for a long time, especially on subscription, that can balance out. And then suddenly you're able to do those ad spends. You're able to actually spend money on advertising if you have kind of the higher cost involved. It's much easier to make a second sale after the first one after you acquire a user. And if you're doing this $5 one-time purchase thing, you basically have to think about, like, am I going to be able to sell a game to the same people every single year, a new game, and reacquire those people every year? That's very challenging. Some people do manage to do it successfully. A lot of people don't. I think I've talked a little bit about these other things, but basically, this is, if you take one homework from this, this article is great. There's a link to it. I'll forward it along later with the slides. But basically, this link goes into something called the 1,000 True Fans theory. It basically says that instead of trying to be this mass market producer, look at trying to just appeal to a small number of people, because it's way easier to appeal to a small number of people, and they're going to be your true fans, and they're going to be willing to spend more. I'm going to go through some quick tips on just general indie stuff, and then I'll get into Q&A. So in general, the lower you can make your living expenses, the more runway you're going to have, the more time you're going to have to experiment. It took me, I don't know, like 7-8 years until I finally found a product that I was able to continuously make money on and continuously be able to support myself on. I would expect that it's probably going to take a long time for a lot of people, so you just got to keep at it, keep trying, you'll get there. But you just got to expect that it's going to take a long time. The lower you can make your living expenses, the more chances you get. And so the more time you have to do indie stuff. Pomodoro technique is really great. Basically, if you're ever struggling to be like, I just, I'm at home, I've got the time dedicated, all I want to do is play games on Steam. Like, I've definitely been there. Pomodoro technique is the thing to look into. Basically, it kind of tricks your brain into doing 30 minutes of work at a time, and then after you set up the habits, you don't really need it anymore. But when you're first getting started, if you're ever struggling, look up Pomodoro technique, follow it. There's some great resources online. I also recommend work in traditional industry.
Big fan of Pomodoro technique.
Yes.
Big fan.
Yes.
Big fan.
Yes. I also recommend people work in traditional industry. Before you go into indie, basically get someone else to pay you to learn is amazing. Whereas if you go into indie right after school, was very tempting. I certainly was tempted to do that because I was doing indie, when I was in school. But if you can do it this way, then you get paid to learn and you don't go through kind of some newbie mistakes that are very costly. Automate everything. Basically, you don't have a lot of time as indie, so automation. Finding a filter can be really good if you ever find a community manager who can help filter out, because I mean, there are some forums, like Steam forums, can sometimes be really good, sometimes they can be really toxic. And so if you can find a filter to do your community management for you for the really toxic locations, but still be available in the places where like your actual fans are, that's really helpful. That can be really helpful for your kind of mental health. Consider a pen name. This is great because if you get famous as an indie, even just like the smallest bit of fame, you're going to get people who troll and harass you really hard, and they will make your life really difficult. And if you have your real name on your product, it makes it so much easier to get harassed, get death threats, get people like basically making it really hard to get hired. Like people will come after you just for having a game. It doesn't even matter what you do, but like the harassment is super real. I'm in like government confidentiality programs now because of this, and it's an ongoing battle for privacy. I could talk about that for a long time, but basically, consider a pen name. Consider not doing indie under your real name because it makes it a lot safer. Anti-piracy, I think, is worth a small amount of time. Don't spend a lot of time on it, but about 90% of copies of games are pirated. So basically, if you can spend time, it's in human nature to just try and grab something off the internet and get it for free. I don't even blame people for it. But like, definitely if you can give people something to, like, if you can make it harder for people, then they're less likely to like pirate it. They'll think about it. And sometimes there's a value recognition process that goes on in their minds of it's like, actually, this is worth $10, like that kind of thing. Finally, most games fail, so build something you like. Even if you do all the stuff in this guide, you might still not financially succeed, but you can still creatively succeed. And so make a product that you like. Don't make something just for the money. 2 very quick tips, not even related to indie stuff, but if you are applying for a job, always include a portfolio or resume. You would be surprised the number of people who have applied for something to work on a product of mine and are just literally, I've sometimes got emails that are, hey, and that's it. Like you would be shocked. It's a double-digit percentage of people who just don't do this. And so always include a portfolio or a resume or both. And finally, life is all about choosing paths. So be intentional. People will always kind of have opportunities for you that might take you further away from where you want to be. And so you should be intentional about what opportunities you take, because that's basically how you spend your lifespan. So with that, I'm going to open it to Q&A. I've also got here's some things that you can ask. It sounds like people already have questions, so we'll dive into that. Can you, what was the question before again, one more time?
Yeah. What is your opinion / usage of ad space in revenue?
My opinion of ad space in revenue. Can you define a little bit more about, like, are you looking for like a percentage or?
I trust that Peter will, as in banner ads in games.
As in banner ads or an ad play to get more. Okay, so yeah, I just got the chat up now, so I'm looking through this. So in terms of like, I mostly talk about, I don't do a lot of the like in-game advertising in my own products. I actually don't put advertising in my games. I'm talking strictly about advertising from a perspective of like, like here is, a website, like buying a banner ad. So yeah, banner ad on websites, banner ad on like YouTube or whatever, or like paying someone to talk about a game. Actual in-game advertising is terrible. You don't make any money on it. It's awful. I didn't include that. That's a great question. I should have mentioned that. But like the revenue that you get on in-game advertising sucks, and people will try and get you to do it, and it just drives people away from you. So I think it's a terrible deal.
There you go, Peter.
Okay.
Okay, so Luke is asking, are subscription platforms a viable method? Platforms like Patreon, etc.
Very yes. Yes.
I love it.
Yeah, very yes. I do actually. I've worked with Patreon for a number of years, and I've talked to the staff there a bunch over various projects, as well as other platforms. There's a lot of subscription platforms. The thing that you have to keep in mind is, at the end of the day, a subscription platform, all they're doing, they are not like a distributor. They do not drive traffic to you at all. You have to drive traffic to them. And that's kind of fair in my book because they don't take nearly as much. I think Patreon is great and they make things a lot easier, and it's definitely worth looking into Patreon. You can also just get a Stripe account and you can build it yourself. basically the big thing is Patreon does offer a little bit of ease of use. It offers a little bit of trust. People trust the platform, so that might be worth 5%. You're still going to have to do API integration and stuff like that, and the Patreon API is garbage. It's terrible.
No.
Yeah, I could talk about that for an hour. I won't.
That's
But like,
bummer.
the staff at Patreon are great. I love working with the staff at Patreon. The API is terrible. It's getting better now. They just abandoned it for 2 years, but they unabandoned it. So they've got a guy who does API now. He's really good. He'll actually respond to questions. But at the end of the day, you are building an API. You're building off an API, and at that point, you might as well just use Stripe, unless you want to use Patreon because they're a little bit more permissive on content that Stripe would not, even though it's the same payment network at the back end. Anyway.
So funny. And you also have to make sure that you're continuing to produce content to justify. Yeah.
You will see a big basically months that I release content, it goes up, and then months I don't release content, it goes down.
It'll go down. Yeah. Or totally, that makes sense. Kindred is asking, what's a good point in my career to start and try to own indie? How many years of industry experience would I need?
So I did mine after. Here's my history. I did mine after, let's see, 5 years. 5 years, I want to say 5 or 6 years. I think that's a good place because basically you've kind of got the fundamentals down. I was fortunate to go through the production track, which is even more business focused, and that gave me a really big leg up. And so I would recommend at least a couple years, but at the end of the day, it also depends on where you are. Because if you're in a bad situation, like if you've just been working crazy crunch, like you might just be like, I'm either going indie or I'm quitting the industry. And at that point, it's then. You'll know.
You're burnt. Yeah.
Yep.
Where am I? Justin is asking, how do you handle life versus work balance as a solo indie dev? It's a great question.
That is a fantastic question. I'm so glad you asked that because it's really, really easy. And it took me a long time to figure out work-life balance. When you start doing indie, it's very easy to like do this thing where you go into like full tilt crunch mode and you spend a lot of time doing that. And you rubber band after you release a game, you rubber band and you feel really terrible and really depressed because you've done all of this crunch and then you release it and then it might not do so well initially, right? And so I've rubber banded a couple times until the point where I realized like, oh, it's really good for mental health to not crunch. And so these days I try to not crunch at all. In fact, I'm trying to do basically once every couple weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. I actually just take a day off, not do work stuff.
That's great.
One of the great things about indie, like one of the bad things about indie is it doesn't pay very much, but one of the great things is you have total control over your schedule. And so that's a perk and you should use it.
Yep, I think that's great. Jody is asking, do you have any suggestions for finding internships in the indie/smaller company space? That's also a really great question.
That is a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer to that. I will say that there are various places, especially like on internet forums and whatnot, for finding indie projects. And so it's less of an internship and more of like a people looking for artists, people looking for coders, etc. There's various places. There used to be an amazing site. It went away. These days, I've heard that there's Reddit. I haven't actually tried this very much, I think, but this came up in a call a couple weeks ago, and someone recommended Reddit has a starving artist or hungry artist or something like that, and it's basically people like matchmaking between like people who don't have a lot of money and want to do stuff. So you might check that out. There's also Lemasoft forums for visual novels or anime style art is really good. Where else? Yeah, it's hard to find places because a lot of the free places went away. There's GameDev.net. There's a couple other places that are escaping my mind right now. But yeah, it's a great question. If you just look for places where indies are hiring, that can be very helpful.
Jeff is asking is saying that he's really enjoyed your talk. Are you able to share your slides with the students?
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
That'd be great. If you just send them to me, or you can put them in the chat here,
sure.
I can make sure that they get to everybody. Peter has another question. How long was your game in development before you felt comfortable asking people for money for the development process?
Also a very good question. So I have done this on various games. And usually you are right. You don't want to just come out and start asking for money before there's a demo. You want to make sure that the game is at least playable and fun. It doesn't have to be very big. But if as long as you have 30 minutes or an hour of playable content that shows really strongly, I think that's really good. But it still has to be playable, and you see that a lot with early access titles that come out. There was one this week that was very big. You guys might have talked about that. Came out and was not necessarily like very playable technically. That's not a great. You don't want to do that, in my opinion. You want to make sure you have a game that's it's not a good look. You got to make sure you've got a technically playable game because that reputation can follow you around for a while, and then you got to like deliver on that and like continue to do updates for a good while.
All right, we got 2 more. I think we can do it. Any advice for, this is Justin, any advice for creating a sustainable roadmap for games?
Yeah, that's thinking in terms of like multi-project, which is really good. Like it's challenging bringing people from one product to the next product. And so when you think about sustainability, thinking about stuff that's in the same genre or would appeal to original audience is really good. If you are doing something in a different kind of game, you're basically starting over from scratch. And that is not super easy. It's doable. And sometimes like you might want to keep trying different things until something works. But if you want to be sustainable, finding a subscription game that you can keep working on long term and then do another subscription game in the same genre and etc., like roll from one to another and kind of like interleave them a little bit, that's probably going to be your most sustainable bet.
That's great. Okay, last one, Peter. Have you ever worked with investors to get seed money?
I have talked to investors before. I've actually had some pretty deep conversations with investors. And it's been all sorts of different experiences from like, meet this millionaire in this dude's home in Japan, and like see how he ticks, like that kind of thing, to like basically like there's one time I was in San Francisco and it literally felt like being on Shark Tank, where you go in and then the investors rapid fire the questions exactly like Shark Tank and you have to defend. Like, so I have seen the whole gamut of like everything from one extreme to another. Ultimately, the thing is, indie games is a terrible investment. It's terrible. Like, if you're going to invest money, no, don't invest in indie games. It's a terrible place to put money. Do indie games because you're passionate about it and you want to do it. It's not a great place to invest. And so usually investors are just not that interested. They're interested in like platforms and things that are going to make ongoing revenue. Investing in individual games and studios is usually, it's a hard pitch. It's a hard sell. They're not usually that interested in it. And I think that's very fair.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. We did it. We have 1 minute. I have one final question because I ask everybody who comes and speaks to our students. How comfortable are you with students reaching out to network with you?
Sure, that's fine.
What's the best method?
Yeah, so probably the best method is I'll drop my email in here. You're welcome to email me. Keep in mind, I'm going to be pretty slow. It takes me a while. So, like, I'm the kind of person who every once in a while I get back to someone like a year later and they're like, oh, like, because it's when you're indie,
get back to them. That's impressive.
I really do try. The problem is when you're working on multiple indie projects, and you already spend like a good chunk of your day just doing community conversation. Like, community conversation is always gonna trump like this kind of stuff because you've got to engage with your community, and then you have to also get work done too, like the actual work that people want to play. So the schedule is kind of busy. Keep in mind, like, I almost never accept LinkedIn from people I've not worked with these days. I haven't done that for like 5 or 6 years. So don't necessarily try on LinkedIn. Also, I hate logging into websites. So that's part of it. Fair. But do feel free, send me an email. It might take a while. My spam filter is extremely aggressive because my email has been kind of spread everywhere. But yes, and I'm also, I'm at AIE from time to time, and I do love talking to students, and I do love doing mentorship type stuff. So
I'm trying to make the schedule so that you can be on the pitch panel. So hopefully you'll be able to engage with the students for that.
That'd be great. Yep. That'd be great. I also hate mornings. I got up early for this. I normally get up at like 2 p.m.
This is early for you?
This is, well, so I got up at like 11:30, and that was a struggle. That was a real struggle.
That's good to know, Robbie. I don't consider this morning, so that's good to know.
Indie lifestyle, you know.
That's fair. I'm going to schedule the pitch panel for the afternoon, so more like
Perfect.
2 o'clock. So
Perfect.
you
Yeah, I
should
can
be
do 2.
fine.
2 is great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing. I know the students have appreciated it. You are a wealth of information, and I'm grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. It's always great to interact with you guys.
Excellent. You take care. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. You guys as well. Have a good one.
Bye.